Hey guys, John here from Bring the SEO. Today I want to talk quickly about Google's Disavow tool. Um, this is a conversation I had just a moment ago with one of my students who is running a campaign, and for some reason the site that he's working on is getting slammed by what appears to be toxic links. Now, obviously this is a concern for him because he's worried that the work that he's done in terms of off-page, that's going to be negatively impacted by these toxic links. Now, the conversation around the Disavow tool, Google's Disavow tool, is certainly an interesting one, and I think the biggest concern for most people, of course, whether it be us as SEO consultants or business owners, is the impact, the impact, or how much, the negative impact, or how much those toxic links can have on our sites. Obviously, you don't want to just sit and wait to see whether or not those toxic links are going to have a negative impact. You certainly don't want to lose all your traffic and everything else. But at the same time, a question that comes about, usually when this is the case, a common question that comes about is, should I disavow these links? Right, now this is essentially what the student was asking. I've got these toxic links that are all coming in from these really low quality sites. What do I do? Should I disavow them? I'm going to share with you the thoughts and the advice that I shared with him when it comes to Google's Disavow tool, and how to think about what to do in the case of when it comes to toxic links. How you should think it through. Now, I want to go back a little bit here. I want to touch on a couple of things, and the first thing I want to say is this: Google has been saying a lot over recent years. We ignore toxic links. Now, this is a conversation. This is something that I find really interesting, right? Google has said it, and I've seen post after post from John Mueller and conversations in various SEO communities. And this is coming from the staff at Google. We ignore toxic links. Now that's really interesting, because that goes against everything that took place back in 2012 when Penguin was released. It was one of the biggest Google updates ever. And of course, for those who were there and those who remember, that's essentially what Google were doing. They were looking for not so much toxic links, and this is where the definition can get, we could argue the definition all day long, but they were looking for unnatural link building or link profile patterns. And put simply, it was about, anchor texts that were keyword or money term rich in terms of the way in which they were implemented. In other words, if you were trying to rank for Plumber Sydney, 95% of your anchors were using that term, Plumber Sydney. But without getting caught up too much in that, it's an interesting thought, right? So in one way, Google is saying we ignore toxic links, but in the other, at least back in 2012 with the release of Penguin, they were saying we're penalizing you for toxic links. So this kind of begs the question, right? Well, are they or aren't they? Now, my question is this: if that's true, that Google do ignore toxic links, then why does a Disavow tool even exist? It's an interesting question, right? Now, what Google should be doing, and this is a conversation I've been having, going way back, at least to 2011, 2012, Google should be ignoring toxic links and only rewarding good links. It really should be that simple. Because if there is some acknowledgement or penalty held or given towards toxic links, that means that negative SEO is a real thing, which if that's true, then means that, instead of bringing our site up, we'll simply bring those who are positioned well in search, we'll bring them down. And of course, Google has always said that negative SEO is not a real thing. So as you can see, when you start taking all of these things into consideration, it gets a bit blurry. Now, my thoughts on this are pretty simple. Do Google give any sort? Are there penalties associated with toxic links? My answer to that is possibly, and it's that uncertainty of not knowing, where I prefer not to take my chances. Now, in saying that doesn't mean that every time I see a toxic link, I'm running off and smashing the disavow tool. That's not what I'm saying at all. But what I am saying is that I just don't know. I don't know. Is there any sort of penalty associated with toxic links? Now, if you look at any link profile associated with any site, you're always going to have a percentage of toxic links because there are scrapers and automated bots and tools and everything else that are pulling information and spreading it around and propagating it on God knows where on the internet. So there'll always be a percentage of toxic links with any site. Now, where it gets a little bit grey shaded is, okay, well, is there a tipping point? Do you get to a point where, okay, well, there's thousands of toxic links coming from farmer sites and porn and God knows where else coming into this site? Is that going to have a negative impact? Now, sure, for some of you, okay, maybe you think that that's going to have a negative impact. For others, we'll say, don't worry about it. Now, to circle back to my initial point here, and this is the advice that I gave my student when it comes to the disavow tool. Should you use it? Well, I think the best advice and this is advice I give often, in most cases you won't have to worry about it, okay? Unless, of course, and I will say this, in addition to that, you should monitor, okay? If you've got thousands and thousands of links, toxic links coming in for an extended period of time, 2 or 3 weeks, then you've got to do something. I think that would be fair to say, and I would say that most SEO consultants would agree with me. But if you've got like a dozen links that sort of pop up over the period of 6 months, well, who cares? It's not going to make any difference. And you really shouldn't be spending your time monitoring that and worrying about the disavow tool anyway. You should probably be more focused on doing other things. So my answer to the question is, should you use a disavow tool? In most cases, no. But I think it's important that you monitor, even if that means just jumping in every maybe 6 months and taking a look. And certainly if there are any issues, and this is what raised the red flag in this case, there was a huge spike in referring domains reported within Ahrefs, and this is why I had a look. So in most cases, no, ignore the toxic links. Don't worry about it. Don't lose sleep over it. You shouldn't need to use the disavow tool. And one other thing that I'll add real quick, Google makes the disavow tool, or at least finding the disavow tool, very difficult. They make it hard to find, and that's intentional because they don't want people poking around with it, which God knows what the answer to that is. Maybe they just, look, there's probably been far too many people screw it up, and that's, that was one of my points that I scribbled here in my notes. Like if you use the disavow tool, you've got to be really careful. I've seen people disavow their own domain. And then they wonder why, wait a minute, our entire site has been DX'd from Google. We've been penalized. Well, no, you haven't. You've just disavowed your own site. What is an interesting point is actually reavow. So if you make that mistake, at least you can reavow. Now, my next point here, should you use it? Most cases, no, but there will always be an exception, and this is what makes SEO so challenging. If you do decide to use a disavow tool, you've got hundreds or possibly thousands of toxic links, and you do decide to use it, I would advise disavowing at the domain level, okay? It makes much more sense to start killing off links at the root level as opposed to trying to kill off links, individual links one at a time. In other words, if you've got, spammysite.com and you've got several hundred links coming from that site, well then disavow it at the domain level, and that clears all of those links rather than trying to do it one URL at a time. Now be careful when you do this. You don't want to make the assumption that, okay, this is a spammy link, I'm just going to disavow the entire site. You've got to go to the home page of the referring URL and take a look at it. And ask yourself, okay, is this a spammy looking site? Actually, no, this looks like a credible news site. I don't know what's happened here, but I'm just going to disavow this URL. Don't just, I get into the habit sometimes, or at least I used to years ago, just nuke the whole thing from orbit just to be sure, right? So that's what I would recommend. In most cases, you won't have to use the disavow tool. If you're unsure, then definitely if you haven't used the disavow tool before, don't try and figure it out on your own. Get some professional help. But in most cases, you won't have to use the disavow tool. I would suggest at least monitoring. If you see a continual spike and there's tens of thousands of referring domains smashing your site, then you have to do something about it. If you do decide to use a disavow tool, be careful and make sure you know what you're doing, and nuke it at the domain level rather than trying to mow the lawn one blade of grass at a time with a pair of scissors. All right, I'll leave it at that. I'll be interested in hearing your thoughts. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.